Have you ever noticed how you promise yourself something, and then quietly talk yourself out of it? You say you'll start tomorrow. You say you'll do better next time. And somehow, that moment never comes. This is where most people don't realize what's actually happening. You keep negotiating with yourself, that's why you lack discipline. It's not that you don't know what to do. It's not that you don't care. It's that in small, quiet moments, you make deals with your own standards. And every time you do that, something inside you weakens. Have you ever caught yourself thinking this way? Just this once won't matter. Tomorrow will be easier. But what if that's the exact pattern keeping you stuck? The problem isn't laziness. It's not a lack of intelligence or potential. The real issue is much quieter, and that's what makes it harder to notice. It's the habit of negotiating with yourself in moments that seem small and insignificant. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, that you'll make up for it later, that one delay won't change anything. But these moments don't stay small. They begin to stack up. They quietly shape your behavior, and over time, they start to define who you believe you are. What feels like a simple choice in the moment becomes a pattern that repeats itself without you even realizing it. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, "It's just today, I'll get back on track tomorrow"? That thought feels harmless. It even feels responsible, like you're giving yourself space. But what's really happening is that you're lowering your own standard in a way that feels justified. And every time you do that, you teach your mind that your commitments are flexible. That your word can be adjusted based on how you feel in the moment. This is where discipline slowly breaks down, not in one big failure, but in a series of small compromises that go unnoticed. The uncomfortable truth is that your mind is always watching what you do, not what you say. When your actions don't match your intentions, a gap begins to form. And that gap creates doubt. You start to question your own reliability. You hesitate more. You delay more. Not because you don't care, but because somewhere inside, you've stopped fully trusting yourself. That's the real cost of these small negotiations. It's not just lost time, it's the quiet erosion of self-trust. The shift begins with awareness. Not judgment, not pressure, just honest awareness. When you start noticing these moments as they happen, you create a space to choose differently. Instead of automatically giving in, you pause. You recognize the pattern. And even if you don't get it right every time, that awareness alone begins to weaken the habit. Over time, as you choose consistency over comfort in even the smallest actions, something starts to rebuild. Your word begins to carry weight again. And that's where real discipline starts to grow, from the inside out. At the same time, it's important to understand that your mind isn't trying to harm you. It's trying to protect you. It naturally avoids discomfort, effort, and uncertainty. That's why it offers you these small deals. It tells you to rest when you should act, to delay when you should begin, to choose ease over effort. In the moment, those choices feel like relief. They feel like the right decision. But what feels like relief now often becomes stress later. What you avoid today doesn't disappear, it simply waits for you with more weight. Do you ever wonder why the same situations keep repeating? Why you find yourself in the same cycle, making the same promises, and breaking them in the same way? It's because the mind prioritizes immediate comfort over long-term stability. It isn't designed to think far ahead, it's designed to reduce discomfort right now. And if you don't become aware of that, you end up following it without question. The shift isn't about fighting your mind or forcing yourself into harsh discipline. That approach often creates more resistance. Instead, it's about understanding what your mind is doing and expecting that resistance before it shows up. When you know that your mind will try to negotiate, you're less likely to believe it when it does. You begin to see those thoughts for what they are, not truth, but a temporary reaction to discomfort. From that place, your response becomes calmer and more intentional. You don't argue with yourself. You don't get overwhelmed. You simply recognize the moment and choose based on your commitment, not your feeling. That's where control starts to return, not through force, but through clarity. And with that clarity, your actions become more consistent, your mind becomes quieter, and your sense of inner stability begins to grow. Every time you say you'll do something and don't follow through, it leaves a mark that goes deeper than the task itself. It doesn't just affect your schedule or your results, it shapes how you see yourself. At first, it may feel small. You miss one commitment, delay one action, push something to later. But your mind keeps track of these moments. It starts forming a quiet narrative. Maybe you're not as consistent as you thought, maybe your intentions don't hold weight. And that narrative begins to influence how you approach everything else. Have you ever noticed how hesitation grows over time? You think twice before committing, you delay starting, you second-guess your own plans. That's not because you lack ability, it's because your trust in yourself has been weakened. The pain here isn't just lack of progress, it's the gradual loss of self-respect. When your word doesn't carry weight with yourself, your confidence begins to fade. You rely more on external validation, more on how you feel in the moment, and less on your own decisions. The insight is that discipline is not just about productivity. It's about identity. It's about becoming someone who follows through, even when it's inconvenient. That identity is built slowly, through repeated proof. Not big actions, but small consistent ones. When you start keeping even the smallest promises to yourself, something begins to shift internally. You feel more grounded. You feel more certain. You start to trust your own direction again. At the same time, many people look for motivation as the solution. They believe that once they feel inspired, everything will fall into place. But motivation is unstable. It depends on mood, energy, environment. Some days it's there, and some days it disappears completely. When you rely on it, your progress becomes inconsistent. You move forward when you feel good, and you stop when you don't. Do you ever wonder why some people seem steady regardless of how they feel? It's not because they always feel motivated. It's because they've stopped making their actions dependent on their emotions. They've separated commitment from mood. They've learned that waiting to feel ready is often just another form of delay. The shift comes when you stop asking yourself how you feel about doing something, and start asking whether you said you would do it. That question removes the negotiation. It simplifies the decision. You act based on alignment, not emotion. And as that becomes your pattern, your actions gain consistency. You stop starting and stopping. You begin building momentum that doesn't depend on temporary feelings. Just this once feels harmless in the moment. It sounds reasonable, even controlled. You tell yourself you're making a small exception, that you'll return to your routine right after. But what often goes unnoticed is how easily one exception becomes permission. The mind doesn't separate these moments the way you think it does. It recognizes a pattern. Once you allow one compromise, the next one becomes easier. The resistance weakens, and the standard quietly lowers. The difficult part is that you don't feel the cost immediately. There's no clear signal telling you something is off. It feels comfortable, even relieving. But over time, these repeated small decisions begin to shape your habits. You start delaying more often, justifying more often, and eventually expecting yourself to take the easier path. That's how inconsistency develops, not from one big decision, but from many small ones that seemed insignificant at the time. The insight here is that discipline is built in ordinary moments, not in intense bursts of effort. It's built in the quiet choices where no one is watching and nothing feels urgent. The way you respond in those moments determines the direction you move in. When you treat each small decision with awareness, you begin to realign your actions with your intentions. The guidance is not to become rigid or overly strict, but to be intentional. When you feel that urge to make an exception, pause and recognize it. Ask yourself whether it aligns with the person you're trying to become. That pause alone can shift your response. And over time, as those small choices become more consistent, your behavior starts to stabilize. You begin to feel more in control, not because you forced it, but because you chose it repeatedly. At the same time, discipline is often misunderstood as pressure or constant effort. Many people associate it with force, with pushing themselves beyond comfort at all times. But real discipline has a different quality. It brings structure, and structure reduces mental noise. When you follow through on what you say, your mind becomes quieter. There's less internal debate, less second-guessing, less tension. The discomfort of inconsistency isn't just about missed tasks, it's about the constant negotiation happening inside your mind. That ongoing dialogue creates fatigue. You're not just doing less, you're thinking more about what you should be doing. That's what drains your energy. The insight is that discipline isn't about adding more effort, it's about removing unnecessary conflict. When your actions become consistent, your mind doesn't need to argue with itself anymore. You move with clarity instead of hesitation. The guidance is to simplify your commitments. Don't overload yourself with unrealistic expectations. Choose what truly matters and commit to it with steadiness. When your expectations are clear and your actions follow through, your mind begins to settle. That's where a sense of calm develops, not from doing less, but from doing what you said you would do without constant resistance. If you've been negotiating with yourself for a long time, it's natural to expect quick results when you decide to change. You want to feel different immediately. You want to act with clarity and consistency right away. But when that doesn't happen, frustration sets in. You start to question whether anything is really changing. That feeling can make you slip back into old patterns, not because you want to, but because you expected the process to be faster. The truth is, rebuilding self-trust takes time. It's not created through one strong decision, it's built through repeated proof. Each time you follow through on something you said you would do, no matter how small, you add a layer of trust. And just like it took time to weaken that trust, it takes time to restore it. The pain here is not just the effort, it's the patience required to keep going without immediate results. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, "I've already tried, and nothing changed?" That thought usually comes from expecting a visible shift too early. But discipline and emotional healing don't always show immediate results. They work quietly at first. They stabilize your actions before they transform your outcomes. The insight is that consistency matters more than intensity. You don't need to prove anything in one day. You need to show up in a steady way over time. Even imperfect action builds more strength than waiting for the perfect moment. The guidance is to lower the pressure while keeping the commitment. Focus on showing up, not on being flawless. And as you repeat that pattern, your actions begin to feel more natural. You stop forcing yourself and start aligning with what you've chosen. That's when discipline becomes less of a struggle and more of a habit. At the core of all this is a simple but powerful decision, choosing integrity over comfort. It sounds straightforward, but in practice, it's where most people struggle. Comfort feels immediate. It offers relief in the moment. Integrity asks you to stay aligned with your word, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one else would notice. The pain is that choosing integrity often means facing discomfort directly. It means doing something when you don't feel like it. It means staying consistent when it would be easier to step back. But what you gain in return is stability. You begin to trust your own direction, regardless of how you feel in the moment. The insight is that your future is not shaped by occasional effort, but by repeated alignment. Every time you choose integrity, you reinforce a pattern that supports growth. You make your actions predictable, and that predictability builds confidence. The guidance is simple in practice, but requires awareness. When you feel the urge to negotiate, pause for a moment. Recognize the pattern without reacting to it. Then choose based on your commitment, not your comfort. That small shift, repeated over time, changes the way you act, the way you think, and eventually the way you see yourself. At the end of it all, the truth remains simple. You keep negotiating with yourself, that's why you lack discipline. But the good news is, you can change that. Not by forcing yourself, but by becoming aware of the pattern and choosing differently, one moment at a time. You don't need perfection. You need consistency. You don't need pressure. You need clarity. And slowly, as you keep your word to yourself, something inside you strengthens. So share your thoughts below. How are you rebuilding your discipline today?